Hi, I'm Julia Wang, and these are my partners Varnika Sinha and Emily Zhang. Our project is on deep reinforcement learning for cybersecurity. In today's world, data is very prevalent in our everyday lives, so it's important that we keep it secure. In the past couple of years, there's been a resurgence in the number of cybersecurity attacks where hackers are successfully retrieving their desired information. Thus, there's a great need for users to have a robust cybersecurity architecture that helps mitigate these attacks while actively protecting user information. Current systems anticipate such attacks, but they're not sufficiently prepared to respond effectively to unprecedented threats.
Our solution proposes that we use a deep reinforcement learning model. In this algorithm, we will be simulating a game where two opponents, the attacker, aka the hacker, and the computer security system, aka the defender, will face off. So in this algorithm, during the simulations, what will happen is that the computer security system will wait for the attacker to make a move, and based on this move, the defender will decide which is the best action to take to counter the attack. So in this reinforcement learning model, we will be using a policy gradient where it will take in a state where it will also include the attacker's moves, and based on that, it will create a probabilistic model where it will decide what is the best action for the defender to take in order to counter the attack. So we will train it using previous cybersecurity models made by humans, and we will focus on the weaknesses that hackers exploit to focus on making that more robust. So in this game, it's like a cat and mouse game where the attacker will be the cat and the defender will be the mouse. And based on the cat's actions, the mouse will also make its own move depending on that. So
due to this security system's ability to adapt to the hacker's actions, it will be able to respond and not simply anticipate the attacks. This can be helpful for security systems such as password protection, cloud security, protection against malware and viruses, voting system security. It also has possible applications in IoT security, where devices are open to vulnerabilities because they're connected to the internet. And so, yeah, these are the possible applications that our security system will have by effectively responding to attacks, current attacks, and attacks not previously seen. Thank you.
Hi. When we say that we want to identify heartbeat systems, what we mean by that is actually astronomical systems of a central star and an object orbiting around it, a pretty large object such as another star or perhaps a large planet. It turns out that in some cases, when the orbiting object gets close enough to the central star, it actually can tidally stretch this star to the point where when we look at the light coming from the star, if it's stretched in the direction perpendicular to where we're looking, we see more light coming just because the star looks larger to us. And you can see on the light curve at the top, it just shows the amount of light coming from the central star as a function of time, that there's this big peak in the middle, and that's the kind of thing we see when the star is stretched. However, obviously, the star has some elasticity, and if you stretch it, you will find that even if you release the stretching, it will then contract and stretch again and so forth, and it will continue pulsating a bit later on as well, just like a rubber ball would if you deform it. So you can see that even when the orbiting object is far away, there is still some pulsation going on. And this pulsation is what we refer to as the heartbeat. And we care about these types of systems because, one, looking at how the star responds to this type of stretching actually says something about the star's mechanical properties, how it responds to force and its internal structure. We can also find exoplanets like that, planets surrounding other stars, because you can just observe the light coming from the central star, and if it's a planet that's causing it, you've detected a new planet or its signature. And finally, these systems just have some interesting orbital dynamics that actually tell us about perhaps even the evolution of our solar system and in general solar systems. So what we want to do is look at this light curve, and we want to determine whether a light curve belongs to a star with heartbeats or without.
So as you guys can see, for the HP system on the right, on the left, you can see some nice repeated patterns, but for the non-HP on the right, there isn't such pattern. By the way, the gaps are just missing data. So the question is, why do we need to use deep learning to solve this problem? So because one, the database is too big for human to process, and second, because we believe there are some like subtle and hidden feature in the input variable, which the human eye cannot capture well, but we hope the machine can learn it automatically. So basically, we are using two methods to do this. One is a 1D CNN. The motivation behind this is we hope to extract the local features from the time series. You can see the input is just a 1D vector, and we have sliding window filters. And we also want to try recurrent neural network because one, we have a perfect time series input data, and second, because the length of the input vector is also variable. Lastly, we also want to run on both time domain and frequency domain to test which one works better. So right now there are more than 100,000 unlabeled observed data, but a very small amount of labeled data. So in order to push forward this project, we need to label those data by either manual labeling or model labeling. But whichever way we use, there's one thought we need to keep in mind, that is to have to make sure that the labeling process doesn't solely depend on the same data we use for prediction. We want to have some independent metrics in order to make the label more trustable. Yeah, so that's basically our proposal. Thank you all for listening.
Hey guys, my name is Nathan. On my left you have Sandra, on my right we have Eric. And our project is called Advanced Scoliosis Detection with Deep Neural Nets. Good. So what we're doing is we're using convolutional neural networks to predict whether a mild form of scoliosis will become more severe. Now what exactly is scoliosis? So scoliosis is a sideways bending of the spine, shown up there in that picture. Now today, there are about 600,000 patient visits a year for x-rays. And if detected early by doctors, a brace, shown there, can be applied to fix the spine. However, there are no current predictive methods for scoliosis, even though neural networks today have been trained to detect what is called a Cobb angle, shown up there in yellow. Now, some important things to keep in mind here are that the cost can be very burdensome for patients. So for instance, the cost of surgery is about $100,000 when a patient has a severe form of scoliosis, shown on the very right. Checkups are about $1,000 per year, so all of these can really add up. So our goal is to figure out, given an x-ray, shown up there, with a certain degree of curvature of the spine, can we train a network that uses training data from these patient visits, 600,000 patient visits per year over many different years, in order to determine if the spine will get worse.
Thanks, Nathan. So as the last picture showed with the mild and severe cases of scoliosis, and as someone who I lived through scoliosis, had severe scoliosis, and had surgery for it as well, really the kind of key driving factor behind this whole idea was allowing the patient to get financially ready for what could come, which is a really important kind of characteristic that not a lot of people have the ability to for scoliosis. Every year when you go in for your checkup, you simply just take an x-ray and the doctor says, all right, great, you're at 20 degrees of curvature, a year can go by and you can either stay the same or you might progress to get worse. So really the whole idea behind this was, could we take someone's x-ray from when they first visit the doctor, where they're anywhere between 5 and 20 degrees of curvature, and predict or essentially give a probability that in a few years down the line, you might have a curvature of 50 or 60 degrees, which will require a lot more invasive surgeries, which cost a lot of money. So that's the whole idea. And we want to do this using kind of CNNs, or convolutional neural nets. And the idea of this is feeding in input data, which is labeled, and on the input side is an x-ray, and it's your first x-ray when you visit the doctor, and it's labeled with what the severity is of that scoliosis down the line. So for example, for someone like me, when I was 14, I was diagnosed with scoliosis, and my first x-ray had a curvature of about 15 degrees, and that would be the first input data, and the label would be severe, in the sense that I turned into a patient who down the line had a curvature of about 60 degrees. So that's kind of the idea behind the data, and Sandra will talk about that later as well. But that will be fed into a network, which will then help classify whether or not a patient will most likely be mild, moderate, or severe. And we can even have this in have many different classifications, whether it be curvature or whatnot. And really the idea behind this is we want the neural network to learn subtle features like where the ribs are located, where the hips are, that really the human eye hasn't been trained for to allow us to learn something from that.
So what are some of the challenges of this? One of them is validation. So like we said before, there's no empirical evidence that shows the likelihood of mild scoliosis becoming severe. However, we believe that developing such a neural net will actually help doctors and physicians determine more and just learn more about scoliosis in general. Also for data acquisition, although there's a lot of data, we're afraid of privacy issues. So further applications of this is that we could, as both Nathan and Eric said, develop features in detect features in X-ray images that might lead to severe scoliosis, and then potentially do therapy and potentially do therapy and preventative measures for people who might eventually develop severe scoliosis.
So dementia is a really important problem in healthcare right now. There's one case every 3 seconds. Someone just developed dementia. And it is estimated to be, to have 131 million patients by 2050. And the costs for dementia care in 2018, so this year, are estimated to be of $1 trillion. And music is proven to help, music therapy, where caregivers or even families play music to patients with dementia, for example, with people with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And it's shown to improve cognitive function, to evoke emotions, and to activate mental activity. But which music works best?
So our project is Seratune, a personalized music therapy system. The users will be having an app and a wristband. This wristband will be recording activity data, temperature, and electrocardiogram. Using this data and an LSTM, we'll be able to infer the mood. The users can provide feedback of this mood using an app, and this will be the last function. Also, with a recommendation system that can be based, for example, in nearest neighbors, we don't need to use deep neural networks here, we get personalized music therapy that can help for people that have dementia. Thank you very much.
Hi, so I'm Joshua, this is David, and our third group member, Akshaj, was unable to make it today. We'll be talking about predicting useful CRISPR-Cas9 outcomes.
So CRISPR-Cas9 is a pretty hot topic in the news right now, but essentially what it is, it's a system that allows you to specifically target a certain region in your genome and make modifications. So this is very useful. Specifically, you give it like one piece of RNA that is 20 nucleotides long, and it directs it to some site and makes a break. And the cell goes and, the cell will go and repair the break in some way. For the longest time, this repair was thought to be really stochastic and like undeterministic in the cell, but some recent research has shown that it's more deterministic than you would think. So at the end of December, there were a couple papers, one that does use machine learning to try to predict these outcomes, and they show that it's somewhat repeatable. And then there's also another one that didn't use machine learning, but they tested like 40,000 sites and showed that it was more deterministic. So the actual challenge with predicting these things is getting these measurements. But since they've already done it for us with like 40,000 sites, we want to take their measurements and then produce something useful. So unfortunately, the one that uses machine learning only trained on 2,000 data points, and this is real data, and you can see they're kind of bad at predicting things with the R² of about 0.03. So we'd want to take their data, specifically focusing on one repair outcome, which is +1, and then convert all of these 20 nucleotide strings into 20-dimensional vectors. So our parameter space is 4 to the 20th, and then feed it through a feed-forward network with the only output being the percentage of total outcomes that are what we desire. And then since we already have existing training set, we didn't get to actually implement this. but in theory this wouldn't take quite too long. But the usefulness is that if we can identify specifically which guides are good at inducing these +1 mutations, these can actually correct something up to 24% of genetic diseases. So I mean, given examples that actually are induced by these types of, that could be corrected by these mutations, some of those are cystic fibrosis, Crohn's, and Tay-Sachs. So if you're actually able to produce guides that will generate these types of mutations, it's very useful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nathan. So what I'm going to pitch today is using neural networks to try to predict the activity of a new type of catalyst that's been developed here at MIT recently. So there it's a graphite sheet on the left with the catalyst specifically attached there on the right. So the reason these are important is, you might have heard of water splitting, where you can take energy and use that to split water into hydrogen and oxygen gas. But you can also, these electrocatalysts can also be used to actually recover that energy back out. You need good catalysts for both of those. In order to accomplish that, you need something that's going to be able to bind the intermediates like that oxygen there. So we'd like to be able to find something that can actually do a good job at binding those intermediate species. So you can start with something that you know does this reasonably well. You can put it into a computational model to generate new types of catalysts from that. So this currently just makes random perturbations to it. But then the next part is to apply some sort of test method like density functional theory to predict the binding strengths. And then we can train a model to that to avoid the very expensive step of doing density functional theory to actually create some sort of regression process to predict activity. So here I've shown a lasso regression on this, and it does reasonably well for the red and the blue points, but not quite as well for the green. So the question is, could we use a neural network to try and improve this sort of thing? So just the idea for the neural network here, you take the system, you cut it down to some piece here that you say, okay, the active site's going to be on the important part, cut it down to that, and then append several parts to it. You say, okay, the active site is a particular atom, and then it's attached to the graphite to a particular one. You get this truncation. You convert that into a SMILE string that shows the molecular graph. And then you can take that SMILE string and input it into some type of neural network. And we think an LSTM neural network would be good for this because you can have the active site, the part that it visits last, which would be the most important part, and you can have other parts of the molecule that are further away are visited earlier, so some of that's forgotten. It's not quite as important. And from this, we could create a more accurate approach to modeling this than just that lasso regression. Thank you.
So welcome to our proposal project presentation. This is group 7. We're Even, Greg, and Michael. And we're happy to introduce today an idea how we can use GANs for automotive exterior design. So to understand why our idea is so powerful, let's just look at the state of the art for a second. So today, automotive designers sit down and they do sketches, they use their inspirations to come up with good ideas that will then lead to a conceptual or a concept car, like you can see in the picture of the BMW 8 Series. And this concept car will later lead to a final design. Down the process, like on the right bottom part, there's a lot of tools currently supporting that. And one of them is, for example, virtual reality. But there's no tool so far that supports the designers in the early stage. And in order to support them in their work, to come up with ideas, give them inspiration and save effort and time, we have come up with an idea with an inspiration tool for exterior designers.
Thank you. So our proposal is to use a style-based generator for a generative adversarial network, which will input a data set of successful exterior car designs of pictures. And the generative adversarial network will learn the latent variables behind these car designs. And then we'll use an auxiliary network to label those latent variables so a designer can control and mix and match the amount of those different latent variables that will go into generating a set of concept designs that they'll be able to use for inspiration in the design process.
The final product will be a tool to help the designers in the very first stage for inspiration. So on the user interface, the designer will have the options to factor in different aspects for exterior design, like models, brands, and types, for example, sports, race, or luxury. To take this tool one step further, we can generate 3D models from these generated images from GANs, and then the designers will be able to interact with these models in virtual reality. Thank you all for your attention.
Good afternoon. I'm Susu, and with my teammate Michelle, we propose to use deep reinforcement learning for radiation therapy planning. So let me first tell you how we generate a radiation treatment plan. So shown here is a 3D CT image of a patient. And physician first would contour the tumor, in this case, which is a spine tumor, and then the organs at risk, and in this case, is the spinal cord and esophagus. And then through a series of magic actions, which I will talk later, here is a radiation treatment plan. Shown here is the 3D dose distribution in the patient, and we concentrate the high dose in the target region and try to minimize the dose to the healthy tissue. So the actions, which I mentioned before, are could be thousands of parameters that we need to modify. For example, shown here are some machine-related parameters and some weights for the constraints and objectives for the optimizer, and also, for example, the multi-leaf collimator design, and also weights of different beams. So through all those actions, we can generate a good plan, which is the reward that we can evaluate. So the goal of a good treatment plan is to kill all the tumor cells and also minimize the radiation dose to the healthy tissue. So the clinical goals here are the goals for that for the patient that you saw in that plan, and all these values in combination will determine the reward that we can use to model in the reinforcement learning process. So, however, it's not always as happy as you see me in the picture to do the plan, because it's very challenges that it requires years of training and experience to generate a good plan, and the process is very time-consuming. It usually takes us 3 days to a week to generate a plan. However, we never sure if there is a better plan exists because we just don't have enough time to try all the possible combinations, actions that we should take, and the patient needs to be treated as soon as possible. Therefore, we propose to use deep reinforcement learning to solve this challenging planning process. So we can, the actions could be change all the parameters that are needed in different combinations, and through the environment, which we think is the CT scan of the patient with segmentations of the contours. And the reward is what you saw, the clinical goals that we need to meet, and the state is the dose in each voxel in the 3D CT image. And through the treatment planning system, which is the agent, I think we can train a reinforcement learning model to help us improve the planning efficiency, and also with this to provide even better patient care. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nina, and this is Jovana, and we're going to talk about diagnosing defects in two-dimensional materials using deep learning. So 2D materials are really exciting for next-generation technologies due to their tunable properties. However, the quality of these materials is really critical to their performance, and Raman spectroscopy is one method that's proven useful as a signature of material quality. However, to complement this, we also need a high-throughput technique to analyze Raman spectra and then rapidly identify and quantify defects to satisfy industry-scale growth and processing.
So the broad question we'd like to ask is whether unsupervised deep learning can automate the screening of defect fingerprints in Raman spectra.
And as we'll show, we use an autoencoder to learn a compressed representation of these material signatures that is foremost resistant to artifacts that are produced by defects, but is still capable of distinguishing different materials in an unsupervised manner.
To generate our data, we modeled the Raman spectra as a sum of noisy Lorentzian peaks, and then we introduced two different defect fingerprints, which are manifested as either a shift or asymmetry in one or more peaks of the spectrum. We generate 3 different materials classes, and then within each class, we have pristine samples, which are just mildly perturbed, and then shifted or asymmetric samples, which have more significant perturbation sampled, with strength sampled from a Gaussian distribution. So, as I mentioned, we used an autoencoder with the network architecture shown here. And we chose this approach because we know that an autoencoder can be used to distinguish different classes while remaining relatively insensitive to slight variations within those classes because it is learning a compressed representation. And so it's quite commonly used for screening for outliers. And this is similar to our problem where we hope to distinguish different materials classes but remain insensitive to slight perturbations that are caused by the defects. And this is quite similar to what our preliminary results show. So here on the left, we see in the latent space of the autoencoder a natural unsupervised clustering by material, while on the right, we see for the different types of spectra, the pristine, shifted, and asymmetric, that the autoencoder's learned representation matches very closely to the pristine, even when defects are present. Thus, the deviation from the autoencoder's prediction from what is fed in as input is a direct measure of the presence of defects. So to summarize, our preliminary results show that autoencoders can be suitable in recovering the salient features of Raman signatures that stay fairly resistant to defects, and can also learn a well-separated representation of different material signatures in an unsupervised way. And as a final extension, we hope we can apply this to experimental or simulated data that's more realistic and further formalize how to actually quantify defect concentration using this approach. Thank you.
Hi. Our project proposal is to use GANs in filmmaking to replace traditional visual effects. So to give a bit of background, the current CGI implementation that we have firstly involves generating 3D models. So for example, shapes, people, animals, superheroes. Then applying some texture, lighting, color, so to bring them to life. And finally animating the CGI frame by frame, which is a relatively painstaking process at the moment. So for example, on the top right, in 2009, the Avatar film, the director used an augmented reality camera so that he could see the live background while the actors were performing. And on the bottom right, it's an image from the Imaginarium Studios in London, where the software records movement of muscles and different parts of the body, so then animators are then able to transfer the expression perfectly onto the CGI counterparts. But this, although this does use some advanced vision techniques, unfortunately it's still a long process, fine-tuning and editing.
Okay, so machine learning in VFX already exists. To our right, we can see an android. It's actually an actor holding a wooden cube, and then the image of the android is overlaid on top of it. And machine learning is also applied to wire removal, which used to be done by hand, but can now be done by computers, and green screen detection. Your smartphone can actually do this in real time, which is pretty cool. Machine learning is also applied to rotoscoping, where you take stills from live images and overlay onto other live images, and deepfakes. To our right, we can also see a picture of Donald Trump and Nicolas Cage overlaid onto Donald Trump, which looks pretty realistic if it wasn't so unnerving. We can also generate human faces from nothing, as demonstrated in class, and there's already a huge data set out here.
Right, so we believe that we can use the generative adversarial networks that we've learned about in the lectures here to replace a lot of the mundane and monotonous tasks that special effects specialists have to do very regularly that could be done much more quickly by neural networks. So imagine if in Planet of the Apes, instead of shooting like countless hours of motion capture footage and then mapping that onto very intricate models with very complex rigging systems, if instead we had a neural network look at the footage that was shot and then look at videos of monkeys and learn the way that those behaved and those looked and then map those directly onto the footage. Or a more recent example in Furious 7, when the actor Paul Walker passed away and they had to replace him, visual effects artists created that 3D model to replicate his face and then put that onto his brother's body in film. Instead, if we had a neural network look at old videos that he was in, like old films that he was a part of, and then you could map those onto any actor that looked remotely similar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am J.S. Ang, and I present to you my inventory assistant. Today is my 5th wedding anniversary. We're out of coffee, my wife said to me at breakfast. No caffeine, bad start. But I believe in turning my day around. I reached for a gift behind the door and presented it to my wife. She glared at me. You bought the same handbag last year. How could you have forgotten? Defeated, I turned to look at my angel, my 2-year-old. Except she was no angel today. She let out the most terrible wail, demanding for her toy bunny. Toy bunny, where is it? The cot? No. The playpen? No. The sofa? No. No coffee. A raging baby. A missing bunny. An upset wife. It can only get better, right? I consoled myself as I approached my car. Reaching into my pockets, I panic. Where's my car key? It has been 2 weeks. The bunny is still missing, the girl is still screaming, and the wife is still mad. I visited MIT Coop for a haircut and perhaps some retail therapy. Looking for a gift, a young promoter reached out to me. I listened. This is more than a drone. This is MIA, my inventory assistant. Except it can be yours, of course. Came straight out of MIT. This gadget navigates around your house while you're at work. It captures images from every corner of your home and transmits them to a base station. Using deep learning image recognition, the base station identifies every item in these images and maps out their location onto a floor plan. With a click from your device, you will know the quantity and location of the items. This gadget gets smarter from here. It also uses reinforcement neural networks to understand and adapt to your consumption patterns. For example, by analyzing daily images captured from your kitchen, it learns if any item type is running low. It also profiles your wardrobe based on their color, style, and quantity. You will never run low on supplies or buy unnecessary stuffs again. Awesome! I grabbed the gadget and headed towards the checkout counter. We found the bunny within minutes of deploying my newest gadget. I returned to the city to look for the perfect anniversary gift. With my household inventory at my fingertips, I was confident that I would not make the same mistake. As I parked my car, my cell phone let out a beep. You are low on coffee, I was reminded. As I lay my hand on the door handle, I realized that I left my wedding ring somewhere at home. It's okay, I reassured myself. My inventory assistant has my back. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Hello, I'm Kai, and my teammate Ray and I both are parents. We have kids. So the question that we are interested in is how AI can help parents raise a child. So being a parent is not an easy job. So we take almost anything of the child. We choose books, music, toys for the children, and all those lead to the kids' development on language, motor skills, and so on. So from the left side to the right side, it's like a black box. We don't know how those books and toys relate to their development. So here we propose using deep learning to reveal this black box and suggest us how, what books to choose and what music to choose that
are best for our kids. But kids themselves are also like learning machine that they can evolve over time. So it's very complicated. So, for example, at 6 months, they listen to some music and they might make some songs that's similar to music. And then 12 months, they can make more songs. They can dance with music. And 18 months, they can even recognize the tempos of the music or pronounce more complex words and even choose books for themselves. So the deep learning here not only learn the path in the vertical direction, but also in the horizontal direction. And finally, at 24 months, the deep learning can suggest us what books to choose, what music to choose, and that are best for the child. So here comes a challenge. So we talked a lot about the AI biasing. So although we make this proposal here, but we cannot answer this question. Can AI really help parents to raise better humans? So the first question, how to define better? People are so diverse. We don't have a single rule to measure how good is a child or a human being. And the second, as a parent, I hope my kid can explore many different things. But it's possible that the AI algorithm learns how the kids like things and then narrow down what things the kids should learn. That's a big question. Thank you.
Hello. Hello everyone, my name is Victor, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about how to use deep learning to assist colorblind people. This is our quick agenda over the next 3 minutes. So we're going to talk first, what is colorblindness and why it matters? What is the problem we're trying to solve with deep learning? What is the proposed solution that we bring here? And what are the potential applications of the solution? Well, first of all, why it matters? Well, in fact, roughly 8% of all men are colorblind, and also 1 in every 200 women is colorblind. So for example, do you guys see any numbers there? I can see any number, but there's a 45 there. When I saw that, I said, wow, that's a huge thing. So what is the problem, in fact, when we deep dive into colorblindness? In fact, usually colorblind people, they can differ large colors. For example, I can see that there's a red square there and also a green square. But things get harder when colors get very small and very close to each other. So there seems to be some logic around the surroundings of the color. It's not just a one-to-one mapping. And the problem that we're trying to solve here is how can we generate image filters that increase the world readability by people just like me, by slightly tilting colors, but however, still trying to maintain them as true to their original as possible. So what are the existing solutions that people have already proposed? The first one are mechanical solutions, such as the very famous Enchroma glasses. The thing is, these solutions have already been proven to be not as effective as they're supposed to be. And also there are some recoloring algorithms that aim to improve color differentiation. The problem is that usually they do drastic changes to colors. Even I can figure out these changes. For example, I can see that the corrected one is way different from the original. And also you lose a lot of details from images passing through these algorithms. So the model that we're proposing here is training CNN with a lot of input images and outputting them, trying to make them more readable by colorblind people, and using a logic behind the loss function, which is dependent on first raising the interpretability by colorblind people, while still trying to maintain minimize the distortion from the original image. So trying to fix or tilt colors a little bit, still trying to maintain them as real as possible. And what are the applications of this such system? You can improve accessibility to digital content anywhere. For example, visual arts, movies, paintings, entertainment. For example, it's very hard for me to figure out if that's a tree or if that's the red troops that are attacking me. And also internet, for example, maps, increasing readability, or even defining new web design rules. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Fatima Khalif, and these are my partners Dina Asia and Yusuf Mardini, and we're interested in how deep learning can teach children to love themselves.
So, first off, happy Black History Month. I recently visited the National Black Doll Museum in Mansfield, Massachusetts, and learned that during the 18th and early 19th century, slave children were not allowed to have dolls of color. They were only allowed to have white dolls so that they could be taught to care for their slave masters' children, not children that looked like them. To solve this problem, their mothers made them topsy-turvy dolls, which looked like white dolls with big poofy skirts, and then if you flip under the skirt, it reveals a secret black doll. Even though there was awareness of this problem like hundreds of years ago, the lack of representation in kids' toys has persisted for centuries. The first Barbie of color made by Mattel wasn't made until 1968, and the first official black Barbie wasn't made until 1980. Which leads to our idea, All Dolled Up. Basically, All Dolled Up is a service that uses deep learning to look at images of people and classify their characteristics and map them to this large set of possible characteristics, which then creates a design for dolls that look like the people they're trying to model. By using deep learning instead of something like signal processing, for example, we are able to include a wide range of eye colors, hair textures, skin tones and conditions, and physical anomalies or disabilities. So how do we do this?
So our methodology would be to firstly collect a lot of ground truth data that would consist of a lot of photos and photo banks of a diverse array of people. We would then train a set of classifiers, some convolutional neural networks to deal with our images. From there, we would apply the most accurate classifier to raw and annotated data. And from there, we'd make the necessary corrections to focus on the weak points of the classifier by manually mapping another set of images.
For our proposal, we'll be using 2 convolutional neural networks. The first CNN would undergo supervised training with a data set of smiling and neutral expression faces, while the second would be trained on a data set of full body images of a large age range of people. The face CNN would use its filters to identify facial features as well as the distance between those features. The body CNN would identify height as well as approximate body shape. We would gather the data to generate a model of a doll based on the person that was fed through our CNNs. To make this process more streamlined, we'll be providing instructions to users for taking the pictures of their face and body in order to decrease the variation of input data in terms of pose, expression, illumination, etc. Furthermore, we would want to accommodate for people with disabilities by including special filters to identify disabilities, including amputees or quadriplegics.
Using this deep learning framework, we hope to provide children with dolls that look like the role models they want and the people they want to care for, as opposed to the ones imposed by them by society. We're super excited about this project, and if anyone has any questions or just wants to talk to us about it, feel free to come to us after class. Thank you.
Hi everyone, we are Team 18th. So the topic of our project page is customer interior designs using the generic models. So if we zoom out and see the bigger picture in history, for the history of industry revolutions, we can say the first industry revolution is about massive production, while the second one is about standardization. The third one, the internet, is about information transformation and communications. I believe the first one is about specializations. Everybody wants their home is the home, not some standard designs, same as everybody's. It's just like I dressing a shirt on the street. I don't like to see other people all dressing the same as me. I don't feel unique. So this need raises our questions. The current situation is that, a lot of people buy their house, like everybody own their house. So there's a huge demand in this market for the interior design. But in order to make a good design, just fit for you, a high specialty is needed. He has to be a very good designer. When he communicates with you, he knows what you need. But third one also is fashion sensitive, also location sensitive. So the styles in Europe and Americans will be different styles in China, for example. And third, like as you say, if we really want the customer design, if the designers really want to like communicate to know what you need, the things will become extremely expensive. So here, as we I just copied this slides from like our lectures, as we remember that. So in the VAE optimizations, so we can find what is hidden variables or latent variables from the existing designs, and then making a new one. So this is how the process works. So we have designs, previous designs, which is highly evaluated, and we try to encoder to find what's the latent variables behind. It can be style, it can be culture, it can be some personal stuff. We want to know what is it. And then when we make a new design, we talk with the customer, or even we know what the customer needs in a very quantitative way. We can generate the special designs just to fit their need. It's just like our friend from NVIDIA. It's like you generate the videos, which is with different style, with different customized need. So in this way, but this tool is adversary. So that means when I generate this new designs, I have talked with the customer to tell it a little bit. Meanwhile, that means we will get new data to know what is the customer design better. It can be a new trend of the fashions. It can be something we don't know before. And then it iterate back to our existing designs. And then we make this keep iterations. In this way, we can recommend design. Because as we saw nowadays in Amazon, for example, the website, it will recommend a product, which is the fixed product. But I think in the futures, with the powerful things of the machine learnings, we not only to get a fixed, discretized product, instead, we can get a design. Also combined with adaptive learnings, like everybody can DIY their stuff. So this is our dream. Like everybody can be an artist. You don't need to be trained to be that. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We are students from architecture, actually, and in our lab, we actually work a lot with sustainable design and energy modeling, and we realized that a lot of the deep learning techniques, for example, style transfer, the GANs, and image recognition, like NVIDIA does, can be transferred, it's very transferable to the architecture and sustainability context, which is why I'm taking this course. So what we are proposing today is neural networks as an early stage architectural design and sustainability tool. So just on a macro perspective, why we are doing this, right? We know that the built environment essentially has a large amount of waste, more than 3 billion tons of raw materials consumed annually. It is very inherently energy intensive, and there are a lot of carbon emissions. And so why we are using machine learning and why we want to use machine learning and neural networks. We know that architects, designers, design is inherently very subjective. And if we were to do it in the early stage, if we were to optimize the design in the early stage, there's a lot of opportunity for downstream impact because throughout the operation and maintenance, you're using a lot of energy as well. And there's often insufficient time and manpower to explore many different design options. And of course, we know that architects, engineers, designers, we have a lot of inherent human error, blind spots, and biases, which of course, if an optimized neural network or machine learning can help to mitigate some of these. So our proposed application is we want to use neural networks to try and generate, again, specifically to try and generate early stage design options to help architects and engineers make better decisions. So, our lab has already done some supervised and unsupervised learning, for example, to extract the key parameters and features and the things that we want to optimize. Like we want the buildings to have low carbon footprint, we want them to have low solar heat gain and good daylighting, we want them to be cost efficient, things like that. So what we hope to do now is to design and develop. Again, we are proposing the GAN model. We'll start off with a vanilla GAN, and then we'll move on to more sophisticated GAN models, for example, conditional GAN. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just breeze through quickly. So what we'll do is we have sample data sets from past projects or the designs that are generated, developed manually by architects, engineers that already use. We feed them through the GAN model, and hopefully the model can generate a lot of different conceptual design options, as you can see from the animation on the right, conceptual design options for architects and engineers. So impact, this will help, this will give us a lot of good impact, like better design options, enhanced sustainability, less wastage, so on and so forth. But we do acknowledge several key challenges that we are facing if we were to use again. For example, the main one is mode collapse, where if the generator keeps generating similar designs, because in terms of buildings, we don't want them to all look the same. We want some diversity, and we also need to validate the GAN outputs. And for that, we can run it with a physics-based model like Energy Plus to actually see whether the GAN outputs is optimized and what are the differences, and to validate it against a physics-based model. And we also need to contextualize the outputs because architecture is a highly contextualized field. So there are similar approaches, like those NVIDIA, the things that NVIDIA have done, and things like people have done to like generate animators, post-guided apparel, and generating photos from paintings, style transfer. So this can be done, but we just need to optimize the parameters, so on and so forth. So some of the preliminary work that we have already done are simple supervised and unsupervised clustering methods to cluster our existing data sets into different categories of buildings, like, for example, residential, commercial, institutional, so on and so forth. And the next step will be to finalize the development of our GAN model and to train on sample data sets. Yeah, I think I'm running out of time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jasmine, and these are my partners, Derek, Isabel, and Quaylee.
So, while we all might observe different dogs, mailboxes, and cookies, we all have a similar idea of what these objects should look like. But in this era of high-definition images, it's often easy to forget the impact of very simple, context-minimal, symbolic representations of everyday objects. Take, for example, traffic symbols. They're very intuitive and easy to understand by human beings. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a deep learning program that's able to create simple symbolic doodles of everyday objects given an input label, and possibly in the future be able to generate simple symbolic representations of objects without being given an input.
Let's say we want an image of a Dalmatian sitting in a park with a family of 5. If you try to look for it online, well, you won't be able to because it's just too specific. And that's where Deep Doodle comes in. So Deep Doodle would use deep generative models to create a targeted image using inputted words such as Dalmatian, family of 5, grass, and to create a specific image that you want. And we would train the neural networks with Google's Quick Data Draw Set and other open source images that we've seen in lecture to create the targeted image.
So the deep learning concepts that we are using, so basically we'll be applying deep convolutional neural networks. So Google's Quick Draw already applies a sort of deep convolutional neural net, and what it does, it asks users to draw doodles to respond to a prompt such as the labels like ask you to draw a cat, and it uses like applications such as procedural loss and to extract like key features from those images. We want to build on that deep convolutional neural net and incorporate it into our system, but in order to speed up the process so that it doesn't rely only on human input, we would apply another CNN that would make use of open source images with labels that you would that would correspond to labels already existing in QuickDraw's data set. Do semantic segmentation on those images to extract low-level features such as the outline, and use that to do like fake doodles, computerized doodles that could be used to improve the data set much faster than relying on humans to input a doodle. So this is just a semantic segmentation example and examples of cats that people have entered in Google's Quick Draw. We'd also be using generative adversarial networks to have our program be able to generate a doodle given an input label and possibly a label that's not already existing in the data set. And lastly, in our application, we'll use recursive neural nets. Given like a random brushstroke, it would attempt to give you subsequent brushstrokes so that you'd get to the end goal of an image, and it would adapt as you keep on drawing different brushstrokes.
So where we see this going in the future with a lot of work and research is to be used in cognitive interviews with victims of crimes. If you've ever seen Criminal Minds, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The next thing is to be used to illustrate children's books or to be used with anime if you're an anime fan. And the last thing, which would have been really good for me when I was a kid, because I was definitely not artistically inclined, like this kid here, who's also not artistically inclined, is assistive technologies for children to help teach them how to draw, like is shown here. So that's deep doodling, going from captions and descriptions to drawings and images. Thank you. Oh, sorry. We have a quick demo.
Hello, everyone. I prepared a quick demo, basically using all of the, Jupyter Notebook stuff that we learned during class. So, essentially, updating an open source library that I found online for Google QuickDraw. We essentially have a Jupyter Notebook where we download the image set, train on it. I'll show you an example of some of the things inside of the data set. Like, for instance, at this index of this vector right here, let's say we switch it to 9. There's a new distinct doodle here. Where's Oh, all right, never mind. But yeah, basically this. But yeah, basically this is the backend for what the final project would look like, which is. Basically this is just a data set, a model that's been trained for, fruit, apples, bananas, and pineapples. And accuracy is, about really close to 100%, just because we use a lot of epochs, which is a lot of passes through the training set using supervised learning. And basically this is what we're driving at. So. But yeah, it'll draw a butterfly for you.
All right, so hi everyone. I'm Max Porline. I was working with Jack Pfeiffer. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. And we kind of wanted to explore machine learning and deep learning in a different light, not really in a science technology way, but with one of our hobbies, which is baseball. So our inspiration for this project was something called MLB Beat the Streak, which is a challenge from Major League Baseball. And in it, you choose 2 Major League players daily. And if you string together a 57-game hit streak to beat Joe DiMaggio's record of 56 games, you win $5.6 million. However, if either of your players goes hitless for 1 day, you start all over. So that kind of begs the question, why won't you just pick the top hitters in the MLB? And there's a clear reason for that, and that there's too many factors that can influence a player's ability to make a hit. So for one, you have the pitcher. So here we have a heat map of pitcher Mariano Rivera, and you see all of the different spots that he could hit around the batter at the moment. And technically, any pitcher and any batter might respond differently to different types of pitches, such as a curveball or a fastball. So it's almost impossible to predict how each of them is going to respond, given that there's a different type of pitch that each pitcher can do. Another factor that plays a role is the weather. So air temperature can change a baseball's trajectory. Air density can play a role in how far the ball travels. High and low temperatures can affect a pitcher's grip. And then windy and cloudy conditions can influence the batter's ability to make a successful hit. Lastly, there's also home team advantage. So in our model, we compiled 16 different variables. We had some time yesterday and we wanted to play around and see what we could do and if we could possibly come up with a successful model. So we used 16 different variables that were compiled from sources such as MLB.com and Baseball Reference. And most categories didn't exist, but they were compiled into Python. And we scaled all of the categories into a value between 0 and 1. Over there is just some of our code, and that was the data entry that we used. And then in our neural network, we used one hidden layer of 28 nodes, and it output a probability of a hit. So we had the input values, which were all the factors that could affect a player's ability to make a hit. Then we had one hidden layer, and then we used a sigmoid function so that we could output a probability. And all active players were fed into the neural network, and the player with the highest output was selected for that night. And our model, since we didn't have that much time or processing capability, we only used training data from 2 seasons, and 2018 was used as the testing data. And the model was largely unsuccessful as it couldn't put together high streaks, and the highest streak was 9. The reason that the model fell short was that baseball is an imperfect game. We didn't really have that much testing data, so we couldn't make such accurate predictions. However, if we do have more time, more testing data, we want to try this model out again. And there was simply not enough training time and power. So some extensions of our model include allowing individual teams to choose rosters before playing specific teams. One of the most important things in baseball is consistency, and when baseball teams are awarding their multi-million-dollar contracts, they want to make sure that they're awarding it to players who are consistent in any type of weather, playing against any type of team, and that's why it's also very important, possibly for recruitment for colleges and sports teams among any sport. It eventually allows them to see which players are most consistent. So even if the model is not completely perfect, MLB Beat the Streak, which was the original inspiration, does give off-day exceptions to streaks longer than 10 to 15 days, and prizes like merchandise are awarded to streaks as short as 5 days. Thank you.